Jake Monroe didn't look like someone who'd make history. At 5'9", with a lanky frame and a farmer's tan, he blended into the crowd at Fort Benning like a tree in a forest. He spoke with a slow Kentucky drawl, rarely more than few words at a time, and carried himself like someone used to disappearing into the background. When he stepped off the bus with his duffel over one shoulder and a second-hand pair of boots, no one paid him much attention. Not the drill sergeants barking at the recruits, not the other young men puffing out their chests. He wasn't loud. He wasn't cocky. He was just ... But Jake Monroe had a secret . It wasn't a dark one, not some trauma or buried past. It was simpler than that. Jake had grown up shooting. Not for fun. Not even for sport. For survival. In the hills outside of Pikeville, Kentucky, Jake's family had lived hard. No cable, no internet, sometimes no power. But they had a rifle. A Deadard .308 his grandfather left behind. Jake had learned to hunt with it before he was 12. He didn't just shoot to kill. He shot to make every bullet count. Squirrels, rabbits, the occasional deer. One shot, one clean kill. No wasted meat. No wasted ammo. That skill wasn't something he bragged about when he enlisted. In fact, he never mentioned it. Not when the guy in his bunk kept talking about deer season in Montana. Not when another kid claimed to have sniped coyotes at 1,000 yards. Jake just listened. Listened, learned, and waited. Basic training was a test of noise orders shouted, feet stomping, egos crashing against each other like waves on rocks. Jake moved through it like a shadow. He ran fast, followed orders, and never drew attention. To most, he was forgettable, quiet, maybe even a little strange. But the instructors started noticing something different when weapons training began. The first time, Jake picked up his assigned M4. He held it like he'd held one his whole life. Not flashy, not theatrical, just natural. Fluid. At the firing line, the recruits took their turns. Targets at 100, 200, 300 yards. Most scattered shots in the general area of the silhouette. A few had solid grouping. Then came Jake. First shot center mass. Second shot same. Third dead center again. 10 rounds. 10 precise hits. No misses. The range instructor leaned forward, squinting at the grouping through binoculars. He tapped another instructor. Check. Out lane 6. A pause. Beginner's luck? The other offered. Maybe. They watched Jake reload with slow precision. Another set of rounds. Another perfect group. This kid ... He's not aiming, the first instructor muttered. He's reading. Jake didn't notice their stares. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply doing what he'd always done. Line up. Control breath. Squeeze slow. Let the rifle do the talking. That night, while others laughed and played cards in the barracks, Jake sat alone on his bunk, quietly disassembling and reassembling his rifle. His eyes moved with focus, fingers nimble, methodical. A few recruits glanced over, but didn't bother him. To them, he was just Monroe, the quiet one. By the end of basic, Jake had qualified expert in marksmanship. That earned him a clap on the back and a passing nod. Nothing more. He didn't celebrate. He didn't talk. He just moved forward, as always. He was assigned to Bravo Company for advanced individual training. Infantry track. Nothing unusual. Except now, word was starting to travel. A few instructors had taken note. One in particular, Sergeant Lisa Tran. A seasoned marksmanship coach marked his file. Keep an eye on this one, she wrote beside his name. Still, among the sea of confident, barrel-chested future soldiers, Jake didn't seem special. He wasn't strong in the gym. He wasn't the fastest on the obstacle course. He wasn't a leader, but when he lay prone behind a rifle, something changed. He became completely still. like part of the earth. Like he belonged in that exact moment, down to the heartbeat. The other soldiers joked about it, gave him nicknames: Sniper, Jesus, Ghost Trigger, Farm Boy X-Ray. Jake never reacted. He wasn't interested in names. He was interested in precision. During one early morning range session, the instructors decided to run an unannounced distance drill. Nothing crazy, just extend the range to 600 yards for a surprise challenge. Most of the company struggled. A few landed 2 or 3 hits. One managed 5. Jake hit all 10. Who the hell is this kid? One instructor whispered. Tran was watching. She didn't smile. She simply nodded to herself and made a note. The murmurs began circulating around the training ground. There was a quiet recruit who could outshoot everyone. No one had seen him train hard, but he never missed. A week later, she approached him during chow. "You ever think about sniper school?" Jake looked up slowly from his tray. "Not really," he said. She narrowed her eyes. "You ever shoot long distance?" He shrugged. "Once, out in the hills. Hit a coyote across the ridge. Don't know how far it was. Just felt right." Sergeant Tran stood there a moment, studying him. It was the beginning of something, because Jake Monroe wasn't going to stay invisible for long. Jake Monroe's name started circulating like smoke, slow, quiet, but impossible to ignore. Within Bravo Company, he was still the same quiet kid who never made a scene. But something was shifting. He no longer blended in quite so easily. Every time the company hit the range, instructors seemed to hover near his lane. Recruits began finding excuses to watch him shoot, just a glance here or there, pretending to clean rifles while stealing a look downrange. It wasn't what he said, because he rarely said anything. It was what he did. And what he did was hit. Everything he aimed at. During one qualifying round, Jake used a standard issue M4 same as everyone else. While others adjusted their stance, rechecked optics, and muttered about wind, Jake took position, glanced downrange, and fired 10 shots. In under 20 seconds. The range instructor blinked, then checked his scope. 10 hits. All within a quarter-sized grouping. "Jesus," he muttered, then called out, "Lane 4, you're done." Perfect score. Jake stood, nodded once, and stepped back. Another day. Another clean round. Later that afternoon, one of the squad leaders, Corporal Davis, cornered him near the water station. "You ever compete before?" he asked, half-smiling. Jake shook his head. "No, sir." "You shoot like someone who's been trained by ghosts." Jake blinked, unsure how to respond. He wasn't trained by anyone. He just watched. Every tree branch, every bird, every gust of wind back home had taught him more than any textbook could. The land had been his teacher. That night in the barracks, the teasing started up again, but it was different now. There was an edge to it. Not quite jealousy, not quite admiration. "Hey, Monroe," one of the guys called out. "Can you hit a gnat at 500 yards? Bet he sleeps with his scope." Another laughed. Jake just kept polishing his rifle, unfazed. But Sergeant Lisa Tran had stopped, laughing. She'd been watching. Tran was known across the training grounds as hard-nosed and meticulous. She didn't hand out praise. She didn't believe in hype. But Monroe... he was different. His control under pressure. His reading of wind drift without needing a tool. The way he used breath instead of tech. It wasn't luck. It was innate. Like he was built for this. During a staff meeting, she pulled up his latest score sheets and handed them to the chief range officer. "You seeing this?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Is that real?" She nodded. The room went quiet. "Let's put him on extended range next week," she added. "No advance notice. Just stretch the limit and watch." The chief smirked. "You think the rookie's for real?" Tran didn't blink. I think we're not ready for him. The following Monday, without warning, Bravo Company was taken to a private section of the Base 1 typically reserved for advanced snipers. The targets were different, smaller, some shaped like silhouettes, others like moving plates. The farthest. One stood just shy of 900 yards. The recruits looked confused. Some whispered Jake didn't. He just looked downrange, calculating quietly. Today, Sergeant Tran announced, "You're shooting like real-world operators. You want to be infantry? Then prove you can handle what's ahead." Some groaned. Some smirked. When Jake stepped up to the long-distance lane, even instructors from other companies wandered over. He lay prone, adjusted his cheek weld, dialed the scope once, then paused. A gust of wind swept across the range. He waited, not for it to pass, but to understand it. Then dash crack. The first shot rang out. Hit. Dead center. Second. Hit. Third. Hit. It kept going. 10 shots. 10 direct hits. All within 5 inches of each other. 900 yards. The silence that followed was louder than applause. A visiting instructor leaned toward Tran. "You train him?" She shook her head. "He trains himself. I just stay out of the way." Later. That evening, Jake returned to the barracks like nothing had happened. He washed up, read from a dog-eared hunting guide someone had mailed him from home, then went to sleep. But the next morning, everything changed. Jake's name appeared on the shortlist for the annual Long-Range Elite Challenge, a competition, usually reserved for high-level snipers and elite marksmen. The news hit like a grenade. Monroe? Private Monroe? Someone blurted in the mess hall. "He's not even operational yet. He's still in training." Tran simply smiled. At the command center, General Nathaniel Redford sat reviewing the roster. He was in his late 50s. Silver hair cut sharp, with a face carved from 20 years of war and sand. He'd earned his reputation the hard way, from combat deployments to covert sniper operations that never made headlines. When he read Monroe's name, he frowned. "Wise. There a trainee on the roster?" He asked his aide. "Sergeant Tran submitted him as a wild card," the aide replied. "Said it's worth seeing." Redford narrowed his eyes. "You know how far the record is?" "Yes, sir." 2,700 yards. "Still yours." Redford leaned back. "Only legends hit that far." He tapped Monroe's name once. "Let's see if the kid even makes it past round 1. Jake Monroe stood under the desert sun, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, sweat rolling silently down his back. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, not from elite marksmen, not from high-ranking officers, not from grizzled veterans who'd earned medals in wars most civilians didn't even know existed. But here he was, an E1 recruit standing among legends at the annual Long Range Elite Challenge. The event wasn't open to just anyone. It was invitation only, hosted deep in the Mojave on a classified range known for brutal conditions, shifting winds, and targets placed at distances that defied belief. Out of 42 shooters selected, Jake was the lowest ranked, the only trainee. Some had decades of combat experience. Others were decorated snipers from special forces units. Then there was Jake, quiet, young, and dressed in standard issue fatigues, with a patch that hadn't even faded from its first wash. Most thought he was a clerical error. Monroe? "That kid's still got sand in his boots," one Marine sniper muttered. "Probably brought him for comic relief," another said. But Jake heard none of it. He stood apart, eyes scanning the terrain. Every ripple of sand, every distant cactus, every whistling gust of wind told him something. He was listening. General Nathaniel Redford arrived in a blacked-out SUV just before noon. The crowd stirred when he stepped out, dressed not in fatigues, but in civilian tactical wear, sharp and commanding. He moved with the weight of a man who had seen too much and survived all of it. Years ago, Redford had made a shot so impossible, they built a new trophy around it. 2,700 yards. One bullet. One kill. No wind flags. Just gut instinct and years of war honed. Reflexes. His record had stood untouched for over a decade. No one had come within 50 yards of it. As he reviewed the list of participants, his eyes landed again on the name. Private Jake Monroe. He said nothing. For a long moment. Then he handed the list to his aide. Give them the line. His aide nodded and approached the crowd of shooters now gathering near the command tent. General Redford would like to remind you all, the aide announced, that the current range record is 2,700 yards. Set during active deployment, under live fire. In his own words, only legends hit that far. The phrase hung in the hot air like a challenge etched in stone. Jake glanced toward Redford but saw only a stoic expression. He didn't react, didn't smile, didn't even blink. Each shooter was assigned a number. Jake was number 42, the final one. That gave him time. Time to observe. Time to measure. Time to learn. He watched as the top-ranked Marines adjusted their wind meters, checked their optics, and recalibrated again and again. They carried custom-built rifles, some worth more than a new truck. Spotters flanked them, feeding real-time corrections as they fired, and still no one hit the farthest target. At 1,800 yards. A few rang steel. At 2,100. Only 2 made contact. At 2,700, the record distance. Every bullet fell short, missed, glanced, vanished into sand and silence. The mood shifted. Excitement turned to tension. The wind was changing fast, gusty, and erratic. Visibility shimmered in waves. Conditions were terrible. Brutal, even. Redford stood behind a ballistic glass panel, arms crossed. Same story every year, he muttered. Close but not legend. When it was finally Jake's turn, the entire crowd turned. He walked forward with no entourage, no gear mule, no fanfare. His rifle was a standard .300 Winchester Magnum military issued, but heavily modified by his own hands. He'd spent the last few weeks tuning it at night, adding stabilizers, adjusting the bipod, rebalancing the scope 0 after every session. No one had noticed. Now everyone was watching. He lay prone, not rushed, not lazy, just focused. Sergeant Tran, watching from the observation tent, felt her throat tighten. She'd trained elite shooters for years. But even she couldn't explain Jake. Not really. Ready, shooter? The range officer called. Jake's voice was clear. Ready? Target 1, 1,500 yards. Jake took a breath. Fired. Ding. Target 2, 2,100 yards. Adjust. Exhale. Fire. Ding. Murmurs spread. The range officer nodded, voice louder now. Final. Target, 2,710 yards. Breaking the standing record will require a confirmed steel contact. Silence. Jake stared through the scope, measuring. Wind, 6 miles per hour, southeast. Barrel, hot, but stable. Bullet drop, estimated over 400 inches. He made a single. Click adjustment. Exhaled and pulled the trigger. Crack. The sound was sharp, crisp. Final. Then. Nothing. 5 seconds passed. 10. Ping. Steel rang out. Faint but unmistakable. The range fell dead silent. General Redford's head snapped around. Confirm that. He barked. The spotter's voice shook as he replied. Hit confirmed. Center mass. Distance, 2,710 yards. Redford didn't speak. He just stared at the field where the impossible had happened. Jake rose slowly, brushed sand off his sleeves, and slung his rifle over his shoulder. People were still frozen. The impossible had just become fact. Not by a veteran, not by a legend, but by a silent, humble kid barely out of training. Redford approached him directly. No aids, no speech. He stopped a few feet away. "You realize what you just did?" he asked. Jake nodded once. "I didn't think it could be done," Redford added. "Not outside war, not on a day like this." Jake met his eyes for the first time. "Just needed the right wind," he said quietly. Redford blinked. Then, in front of every shooter, every officer, and every camera on the field, he raised his hand and saluted the rookie. The crowd erupted, and somewhere in the sand, under the scorched Mojave sun, a new legend was born. The desert wind hadn't settled, but the silence had been broken. Jake Monroe, once the invisible rookie, had shattered the Army's longest-standing long-range shooting record. One shot, one ping, one stunned general. Word spread faster than wildfire through the Mojave base. Before Jake even returned to the barracks, his name had reached command centers, sniper schools, and even rival branches. Screenshots of the hit confirmation were already circulating among infantry circles. The quiet, Kentucky farm boy who barely spoke during roll call had become the man no one could stop talking about. But Jake didn't care for noise. He declined the post-ceremony photos. He ignored the men lining up to slap his back or ask what kind of scope he used. He walked straight back to the equipment tent, broke down his rifle, cleaned it in silence, and slipped into his bunk as though it were just another Tuesday. Sergeant Tran found him polishing his barrel alone. "You know you just became the most talked about shooter in the Army, right?" she asked. Jake didn't look up. "That a good thing?" Tran smiled. "Depends on who's asking. Command wants to send you to sniper school immediately. They'll fast-track you. Special unit placement, advanced training. They're even talking SOCOM invites." Jake looked up at last, eyes calm, unwavering. "Don't need medals. I want to learn more first." "More?" She laughed lightly. "You just broke the range record." Jake shrugged. "A rifle's like a horse. You don't stop learning after your first ride." Tran watched him for a moment, then nodded with quiet respect. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing something pure mastery. Back at headquarters, General Redford stood over a map spread across a steel table, but his mind wasn't on tactics. He still saw that shot, the way Jake had studied the wind like it was speaking to him. The absence of nerves, the calm, surgical execution. Redford had seen world-class snipers crumble under less pressure. He'd built his entire reputation on that one mythical shot a decade ago. Now it was gone, toppled by a recruit who still slept in a shared barracks. He wasn't bitter. He was fascinated. He turned to his aide. "What's Monroe's background?" The aide read from a tablet. "Rural Kentucky. No formal shooting experience. No hunting licenses on file. No high school athletics. No academy. Scored average on PT. Scored exceptional on marksmanship. But otherwise, nothing remarkable on record." Redford rubbed his chin. "Any indication of prior training?" "No, sir. In fact, we checked. Nearest range to his home is over 100 miles. He was never registered at any." "Then where the hell did he learn to shoot like that?" The aide hesitated. "He told an instructor once he just watches the wind." Redford leaned back slowly. "Get me Sergeant Tran. I want to meet the kid again, off record." The following day, Jake was summoned to an off-site training facility near the edge of the Mojave. No cameras. No audience. Just Jake, Sergeant Tran, and Redford in a private observation tower overlooking an empty range. The general didn't wear his stars. Just a tan windbreaker and mirrored glasses. "Private Monroe," he said, offering a hand. Jake shook it. "No. Ceremony today. No applause." I just want to understand what makes you different. Jake nodded once. Redford gestured to the table. Explain how you made that shot. Every variable. Jake took a breath. I measured wind drift based on sand. Trail patterns. Adjusted for barrel temp new, it'd rise about 10 degrees from ambient. The round's drop at that distance meant a 4.2 mil holdover. Sun was at 2 o'clock, so I shifted right 0.3. Used a 4-second break for the gusts. Redford raised his brows. That single quote's ... beyond advanced. Jake nodded again, simply. Who taught you that? Jake hesitated. No one, sir. I just listen. To what? Jake looked across the dry land. To the earth. Wind. The way the dust floats. It all tells you something if you don't rush it. The general stared at him for a long moment. Then he asked, why not take the sniper school slot? Jake shrugged. I want to learn slow, not skip steps. Redford was silent, then chuckled once. You just humbled half the army. But you're still worried about rushing? Jake's face remained serious. A rushed shooter forgets the target. Redford nodded slowly. You remind me of someone I knew back in Kandahar. Quiet kid. Only spoke when he had a scope in his hands. You know what happened to him? Jake shook his head. Redford stared into the heat haze. He didn't get a chance to train others. Didn't make it home. Talent like his died with him. He turned back to Jake. You make sure yours doesn't. Jake nodded. Yes, sir. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Redford stood before a group of senior trainers and sniper instructors. I want Monroe given instructor access, he announced. One major looked up. But sir, he's a private. I don't care if he's a janitor. That kid speaks the language of steel and stillness. Others can teach range theory. He teaches instinct. There was no argument. By week's end, Jake had returned to Bravo Company, but this time, with a new role. He wasn't just another recruit anymore. He was a quiet teacher, guiding others one by one. He didn't lecture. He didn't shout. He walked the line, corrected grips, adjusted breathing, and reminded them that shooting wasn't force, it was listening. The barracks whispered his name at night now. Not with jokes, but with awe. Jake Monroe, the rookie, who outshot the legends. He hadn't even started. The Mojave sun was merciless brutal, even by military standards. Waves of heat shimmered off the sand, turning the range into a sea of mirages. Wind gusted unpredictably, howling in bursts that could throw off a shot by feet. It was the kind of day where even the best shooters second-guessed their skill, not perfect, for what the Army called a live edge standoff. A full range, no aid, open shot competition. No spotters. No laser rangefinders. Just the shooter, the rifle, the earth, and instinct. Jake Monroe stood at the edge of the firing line, expression unreadable as always. His name had been moved to the front of the roster this time, not by mistake, but by intention. Let's see what the legend in the making does under real pressure. Someone murmured. This wasn't a ceremonial shoot. There were no applause lines, no banners. Just 15 of the Army's best marksmen, each aiming to walk away with confirmed hits on 4 separate steel targets ranging from 800 to 2,600 yards, all hidden in different quadrants across a shifting field. General Redford stood in the shaded observation tent with his arms crossed. He's good, he said quietly to Tran. But is he consistent? He's more than that, Tran replied. He's deliberate. Each shooter was given 1 chance per target. No second shots. No corrections. Fail any 2 targets, and you're disqualified. The first 4 shooters went. 2 made it past the 1,800-yard mark. None hit the final steel. The crowd tensed as Jake stepped up. He walked calmly, just as he always did, to his marked spot. He lay prone on the mat, extended his bipod, and scanned the terrain. He didn't adjust right away. He watched, waited. A dust devil, twisted far downrange. Wind, unpredictable. Temperature, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and rising. Jake closed his eyes for just a second. Tran noticed. He's sinking, she whispered. Target 1, the range officer called. Wind, southwest, distance, 820 yards. You may fire. Jake adjusted 1 click left, 2 down. The rifle breathed with him. Crack. Ding. Bullseye. Target 2, 1,320 yards. No hesitation. He exhaled again. Crack. Ding. The crowd murmured. 2 hits. All that stood between Jake and a full clear was what no one else had managed today. Final 2 targets. Target 3, 1,960 yards. Gusts reaching 10 miles per hour. Jake recalculated everything in his head. Bullet drop, mirage shimmer, GUST brakes. Crack. Ding. Barely audible, but a confirmed hit. Even Redford smiled now. Target 4, 2,610 yards. This one had broken everyone. No one had landed a hit. It was at the edge of visibility, set behind a rusted jeep half buried in sand. The sun, now directly overhead, distorted the view even more. Jake blinked once, shifted 2 clicks, then stopped. He didn't fire right away. A full minute passed, then 2. The entire range went still. Jake slowly rotated the scope dial, paused, adjusted again, then waited for a wind lull. It came. He squeezed the trigger. Crack. 4 seconds passed. 5. Then dash ping. Faint but undeniable sound. The final target had been hit. Confirmed. A perfect run. The silence broke into astonished cheers. Even the other competitors applauded, some reluctantly, others in genuine awe. Redford stared across the desert. I've seen combat veterans freeze under pressure, he muttered. And this kid's drawing with the wind like it's a pencil. Tran grinned. He's not just good, he's in a class by himself. Later, back at base, a formal debrief was held. Jake sat quietly while the senior officers reviewed his data bullet velocity, wind deviation, heat distortion readings. All the tech showed one thing. There was no trick, no anomaly. Jake simply read the range better than anyone else. One colonel stood and asked him directly, "How did you predict that last windbreak so precisely?" Jake looked up. "I saw a vulture dive left across the ridge. Birds ride pressure. Told me the air was thinning. That meant a lull was coming." The room went quiet again. He wasn't calculating. He was feeling. The Army's media unit requested an interview. Jake declined. A weapons manufacturer offered to sponsor a signature rifle line in his name. He said no. A sniper school out of Fort Bragg asked him to guest instruct. He agreed, but only on one condition. No cameras, no promotions, just students. General Redford personally approved it. "You sure you want to stay in Bravo Company?" Redford asked him later that day. Jake nodded. "They're my unit. I'm not done there." "Then what do you want, Monroe?" Jake thought for a moment. "To be useful," Redford chuckled. "You just hit the hardest shot of your generation, and all you want is to be useful?" Jake shrugged. The target doesn't care who pulls the trigger. As the sun set that evening, Jake returned to the range alone. He lay in the dust once more. No gun, just his hands under his head, staring at the same sky he'd studied since childhood. Tran found him there just before nightfall. "You always this quiet?" she asked. Jake grinned faintly. "Just when I'm thinking. What about?" He looked to the stars slowly emerging in the sky. About how far is still possible. The aftershock of Jake Monroe's 2,610-yard hit rippled through military circles like a seismic wave. It wasn't just that he'd made the shot, it was that he made it look calculated, not lucky. Within 48 hours, his performance was circulating among commanders, analysts, and weapons labs across the Department of Defense. A 3-star general in Washington reportedly paused mid-briefing and asked, "Who the hell is Private Monroe, and how did he do this without tech?" General Redford received calls from top brass, defense intelligence, and even civilian advisors from DARPA. They all wanted one thing: to study Jake. Jake wasn't interested in being a case study. He returned to his normal duties in Bravo. Company morning drills, cleaning gear, helping rookies sight in scopes. While most would have basked in fame, he avoided it entirely. Tran, however, noticed the subtle change in how others looked at him now. Officers lowered their voices when he passed. Soldiers whispered in awe. Some saluted a little faster. And Jake? He just kept his boots clean and his scope cleaner. Still, Redford couldn't shake what he'd seen on that range. It wasn't just a talent. It was something closer to instinct, fused with science. A hybrid most couldn't comprehend. So Redford made a decision that would bend protocol. He requested a classified field test. He wanted to know how Jake would perform in a live tactical scenario, not against paper or steel, but in unpredictable, real-world terrain. Not simulated. War. Simulated chaos. Jake was summoned to a private briefing room 3 days later. When he walked in, Redford, Tron, and 2 men in civilian suits stood around a digital map of a mountain valley in Nevada. "Private Monroe," Redford began. "We're putting together a Lev Fire training operation, one involving multiple variables, unknown positions, and civilian markers. No lethal ammo, but the tactics will be real." Jake nodded. "You want me to take the shot?" "No," Redford said. "We want you to run the op." Jake blinked. "Sir?" "You'll lead a 2-man recon unit, identify hostile elements, coordinate simulated neutralizations, and extract within a 6-hour window. No support, no overhead. Just you, your spotter, and the terrain." Tran slid a folder across the table. Inside was a mission file titled Operation Black Mirage. Jake didn't flinch. "When do we leave?" he asked. 2 nights later, under a crescent moon, Jake and Corporal Miles, a combat-tested spotter from Delta Force, were airdropped into the Nevada Valley with one goal: locate and eliminate 5 enemy targets hidden across 14 miles of rocky terrain, using only natural vantage points. From the moment they landed, Miles noticed something unusual. Jake didn't check the GPS. He looked at the wind pattern through the grass, smelled the air, tapped the moisture from a rock. "You're like a bloodhound," Miles muttered. "I've seen intuition, but this is next level." Jake smiled. "You don't find targets with gear, you find them with patience." For the next 5 hours, Jake moved through the valley like he'd walked it all his life, while Miles relied on data. Jake relied on the language of the land, tracking foot pressure in the dirt, reading the stillness of birds and trees, sensing light changes in the cliff shadow angles. And one by one, they found the targets. Simulated shots confirmed kills from 1,100 to 2,400 yards. All one-shot hits, all while remaining completely undetected. They reached the exfil point with 40 minutes to spare. Redford watched live feed from command. "Sir," a tech whispered, "you're going to want to see this." He pointed to Jake's rifle cam. The last shot had been made during a 3-second window when the wind dropped by a mere fraction, something no sensor had picked up. Redford leaned back, hands steepled. "This changes everything," he whispered. When Jake returned to base, he was told to report directly to Redford's office. The general stood as he entered. "Private Monroe," he said, "you've redefined what a long-range operator can be. But more than that, You've changed how we think about battlefield perception." Jake stayed silent. Redford continued. "We want you to begin training with a classified doctrine unit. Ghost tier. It's voluntary. No medals, no records. Just impact." Jake paused. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition." Redford raised an eyebrow. "I still train Bravo. And I want access to rookies with untapped potential. Ones like me." Redford smiled slowly. "Deal." Weeks later, a new course was added to an obscure sniper curriculum deep in a mountain facility. Students didn't know the instructor's name only, that he taught without ego, spoke in observations instead of orders, and saw things they couldn't explain. They called him the Wind Reader. Redford attended one of the sessions, watched silently as Jake corrected a shot by listening to tree rustle rather than using the range flag. Redford turned to Tran. "He doesn't just break records," he said. "No," Tran agreed. "He bends reality." And as Redford walked back to his vehicle, he saw young recruits gathered around Jake, not in awe, but in trust. Jake wasn't chasing legacy. He was building it quietly, one recruit at a time. A month after Operation Black Mirage, whispers of Jake Monroe's abilities moved from hushed barracks talk to high-level strategy meetings. Not officially, of course. His name rarely appeared in reports, but officers began calling him the Anomaly, and his techniques, unorthodox, precise, and deeply instinctive, were now under quiet study. The Army wasn't just watching Jake anymore. They were adapting. At Fort Dagger, an experimental sniper division was quietly reopened after years of dormancy. Its mission: explore alternative engagement philosophies based on environmental rhythm, camouflage consciousness, and instinctive response tactics Jake had used naturally. But Jake wasn't interested in being a lab rat. He wanted to teach. Train soldiers to see, not just shoot. And so, he did. He kept his deal with General Redford, spending half his time with Bravo Company, mentoring rookies who showed even a sliver of that silent hunger, the same one he once carried into training. Taught them how to listen to the way silence changed before wind moved. How to wait through boredom, not past it. How to know the difference between patience and paralysis. He never raised his voice, never sought applause, but soldiers started hitting farther, spotting sooner, staying invisible longer, and the doctrine shifted, slowly but surely. General Redford found himself in a strange place watching a legacy he once ruled now get rewritten by someone half his age. Wearing no medals, holding no rank beyond private first class. But instead of bitterness, Redford felt something he hadn't in years. Hope that the future of the Army wouldn't be dictated by technology alone, but by individuals who could bridge instinct with intelligence. Hope that legends didn't need to arrive fully formed. They could emerge from silence, walk barefoot through fog, and hit impossible targets without ever asking for praise. One afternoon, Redford called Tran into his office. "I've been reviewing the wind analytics from Jake's training modules," he said. "It's not just marksmanship. He's rewiring how we interpret field behavior." Tran nodded. "He's not reading the battlefield, sir. He's listening to it breathe." Redford leaned back, eyes tired but curious. "I want you to oversee his transition into command influence. Quietly, no press, no spotlight. Let him lead like he lives in the shadows." Weeks later, during a night shoot in a remote desert range, a group of young trainees watched Jake lie flat on the dirt, motionless. He waited 7 minutes before firing. One of the trainees, a loud-mouthed corporal from Detroit, asked afterward, "Sir, why didn't you shoot earlier? You had the line." Jake looked up, calm. "I had the line," he said, "but the shot didn't have me yet." It sounded like mysticism. But then the instructors broke it down. The dust hadn't fully settled from a nearby step. A microgust was about to distort the trajectory by 1/10 of an inch. The sun angle hadn't reached ideal. Cross shadow. He didn't guess the perfect moment. He knew it, and they all began to understand. Jake wasn't just a prodigy. He was building a new language of warfare. Later, that month, Redford stood on the roof of command headquarters, watching a cargo chopper fly out across the base, Jake aboard. The boy was headed to a joint NATO observation program, invited not as a sniper, but as an instructor, a private first class teaching captains. Redford chuckled. Only months ago, he had said, only legends hit that far. Now the kid was shaping how the world understood far. Tran joined him on the rooftop, sipping black coffee. You ever think, she asked, that legends don't always roar? Redford gave a tired smile. I used to believe war made legends. Now, I think some just walk in quietly, make one perfect shot, and never need to talk about it again. They watched the chopper disappear into the clouds. Jake returned weeks later with even more invitations and hand sniper schools in Poland, environmental combat symposiums in Norway, adaptive rifle calibration labs in Texas. He turned most down, but for one invite from a rural community program for underprivileged youth, he said yes. They just want someone to teach them how to see the land like it matters. He told Tran. She nodded. That's how you started, isn't it? He smiled. Still how I live. That winter, Bravo Company was invited to participate in a cross-unit competition at the elite Silverhawk range. Jake didn't compete. He stood back, clipboard in hand, whispering advice to a nervous recruit from Montana, who had barely qualified weeks earlier. When she hit the 2,100-yard target, the range went quiet. Redford, watching from afar, turned to the visiting general beside him. She was trained by Monroe, he said simply. The general raised a brow. Monroe? The range record kid? Redford nodded. No longer just a legend. He glanced toward the sun setting behind the mountains, the air cooling, wind fading to a still hum. He's building an army of them. The auditorium at Fort Dagger buzzed with quiet reverence. Soldiers from across branches, dignitaries in stiff uniforms, instructors from elite schools all gathered for one reason. General Redford's retirement address. It wasn't publicized. There were no reporters. But everyone in the military who mattered knew this was more than a farewell. It was a passing of the torch. And most weren't there for the general. They were there for the man he was about to name. Backstage, Jake Monroe sat alone in a folding chair, still in his standard fatigues. No ribbons, no brass. Just a name tag, Monroe. He'd refused every request to wear dress blues. I didn't earn any of this in ceremony, he told Tran. I earned it crawling through dust. She smiled. You've earned the world, Monroe. You just don't want to own it. He looked down at his boots, worn and caked with Mojave dust. I don't need to. On stage, General Redford adjusted the microphone. His voice, gravel-lined from years of barking orders and battle smoke, was steady. When I first saw a young private hit 2,710 yards, I thought it was a fluke. I thought lightning had struck once. And that was that. The crowd chuckled lightly. But then I watched, I listened, and I learned that lightning can strike quietly, repeatedly, and sometimes it doesn't burn. It teaches. He took a long pause. There are men who shoot well. There are soldiers who lead well. But rarely, very rarely, do you find someone who changes how we understand war. Redford nodded toward the wings. Private First Class Jake Monroe, come up here. There was no cheering. Just a kind of hushed awe as Jake stepped into view. He looked like any other soldier, except for the way he walked, not with swagger, but precision. Not proud, but anchored. As he stood beside Redford, the general turned to him with something close to reverence. Monroe, didn't ask to be recognized. He never sought to outshine legends. But he redefined what a legend is. He looked back at the crowd, and that record-breaking shot wasn't his greatest achievement. Murmurs rippled across the room. No, Redford continued, his true achievement was every soldier he taught to believe in their silence. Every sniper who now understands patience, not as delay, but as timing. Every squad that sees nature not as backdrop, but as strategy. He then turned fully to Jake. And for that, I don't promote you. I don't medal you. I honor you. He extended his hand, and then saluted. Jake, hesitant at first, returned it, and the room stood with him. No applause, just standing. Because sometimes, that's how legends are acknowledged. Weeks later, Jake returned to the woods of Kentucky, not as a hero, not as a speaker, but as a volunteer at a youth camp that trained kids in navigation, survival, and respect for nature. No one there knew who he really was. They just called him Mr. Jake. He taught them how to move through forests without disturbing the birds, how to listen to wind like it whispered secrets, how to know when not to take the shot, because stillness was often more powerful. And he was happy. Back at Fort Dagger, instructors still used his name, but not to boast. To remind. They'd say, do it like Monroe. Or, breathe through the dust. That's how Monroe taught. Sometimes it was just a whisper when a recruit held their breath too long. Jake never rushed. Don't you dare. A year later, an international sniper contest held in Iceland made headlines. A 21-year-old Army specialist named Donna Klein broke the 2,800-yard barrier-shattering Monroe's record. Reporters begged Jake for a quote. He gave them only 5 words. I always knew she would. No jealousy. No surprise. Just a man who understood that true legacy isn't the shot, who you help take the next one. On the anniversary of Redford's retirement, the Army renamed the Elite Marksman Academy. It was no longer Silverhawk Range. It became the Jake Monroe Institute of Adaptive Warfare. A metal plaque at the gate bore no photo. Just a quote engraved beneath his name. Legends aren't loud. They're accurate. One day, as a group of new cadets visited the institute, one young recruit pointed at the plaque. Who's Monroe? She asked. The instructor smiled. You'll know by the time you leave. She raised an eyebrow. Is he the one who hit 2,710 yards? No, the instructor replied. He's the one who made sure others could hit even farther. They walked past the gate. Beyond it, fields of wind and silence waited ready to teach the next one, just as Jake had taught them.